So we're going to have 3 people on this panel. The panel is about how to hire a data scientist. So I think many companies are finding that it's surprisingly difficult to try to hire the first person to do data science. There really aren't enough people with the right set of technical skills. And when you actually start to look at people, you realize that they seem good at paper, but maybe are not so great. So we're actually going to speak with Oliver and Jay, who are both here from DonorsChoose. Come on out. And then also Max, who is from Shron Data Consulting. And Max was actually the one who helped consult and help advise them find someone so they could hire their first data scientist. So yeah, let's get started. So Oliver, what sort of data does DonorsChoose have? I mean, how did you realize that you wanted to hire a data scientist?
Yeah, let me perhaps start by introducing the org. Well, so first of all, I'm Oliver. I run engineering and product at DonorsChoose.org. And DonorsChoose.org is a website where public school teachers go and post their best ideas for classroom projects that their schools can't otherwise afford. And then folks come to the website, and they help bring them to life using their credit card. Some people have called it like Kickstarter for classrooms. And it's very direct. It's very transparent. Once a project's fully funded, our org actually purchases the materials, has them delivered to the classroom. The classroom then, teacher takes photos of the kids doing the activity, holding the things that the donors bought for them. And we send that back to the donor digitally, it's kind of closing the loop. It was founded by a public school teacher in the Bronx a little more than 10 years ago, and has grew to the rest of the Bronx and the rest of New York City. And for the last 5 years, we've been serving classrooms nationwide. And the good news is that it's really working. So we've done $120 million in donations to classrooms since inception. This past school year, we did $42 million in donations. The average donation is about $50, and the average project is about $500. Just to give you, you can do the long division yourself, and notice that we're doing sort of real volume here, which is great. And we've delivered resources to about 7 million students, predominantly in high-need classrooms. And this, perhaps our most exciting stat, is that more than 50% of the public schools in the country now have a teacher who's used this website to get resources for their classroom. So to loop around and answer the question, so in terms of our data, we have an API, although we've predominantly used it to date with corporate partnerships. Internally, we have a lot of really juicy data. So we've got about 2 million donations, in other words, from a donor to a project. We have more than 300,000 funded classroom projects, more than 800,000 donors in the system, about 250,000 teachers. We've got all the materials that a teacher has ever requested for their projects, whether it was funded successfully or not. We've got all the searches that donors have done when they go looking. So we've got this great data. And we had a data analyst in the past. And this was a role in our finance department. It was more sort of the traditional role. And frankly, it was much more sort of doing directed queries. Hey, can you look at our database and answer this very specific question? It wasn't at all exploratory, and there was no sort of looking outside of our walls. The big realization for us actually came last summer. So we hosted a developer and data cruncher contest called Hacking Education. And we were challenging developers and data crunchers to dig into our API, dig into our data, and see if they could find things that would help our website or help classrooms get funded or maybe change education in America. And it was cool. We had Stephen Colbert who's on our board, awarded the winner a prize on set. We had great judges like Fred Wilson and Wendy Kopp, who runs Teach for America, and our very own Hillary Mason, and a bunch of the submissions. And for this contest, we opened up all the data that I mentioned before, which we had never done before. We opened it all up after scrubbing it and said, hey, this is for the first time out there, go nuts. And a bunch of the submissions in the data category are really what opened our eyes to saying, wow, there's so much here, there's more here than we even realized. We should do, we can do much more with this. So we then started to kind of envision this role, and we had the idea of the role focusing on 3 areas. The first, probably the most obvious, was helping us make better business decisions. So a simple example is, we have most people make spot donations on the website, but we do have a subscription giving feature. We can sign up to give $20 a month, and you still get to pick the classroom project. So one of the things that we should look at is, hey, what are the characteristics of people who sign up for this? Because if we knew a little bit more about them, maybe we could market the subscription giving product to others who meet that profile, but aren't yet signed up. And the other area we wanted to focus on was the idea of taking our kind of e-commerce and online marketplace learnings and sharing them more broadly, because as a nonprofit, transparency is in our best interest, so therefore we're very transparent and open, and with the explosion of not just e-commerce but online marketplaces, we said, wow, this could be a way for us to give back, both to help other charities and also just to share knowledge. So a simple example is when we were talking to our board member, Fred Wilson, about this position, we were imagining that he would throw out like really complicated, meaty queries to ask of our data. And he said, what I'm just interested in is when someone gives for the first time, what's their preferred payment method? And we were like, wow, we could probably figure that out in about 10 minutes. But it was just now occurring to us that we could pull that data and share it and perhaps help other people doing the same. And then the last area of focus, perhaps the most interesting and high risk, but also most promising, is the idea that maybe we could have findings in our data that could influence the future of funding for education or how teachers are instructed. So we think of ourselves as having the most innovative, active teachers in the country using our website. And they're given a blank slate to request whatever they want. And so there's data in there about what they need as frontline educators and what they're trying out in the classroom, what they're experimenting with, that we think is really powerful. So a simple example is that anecdotally a while back we noticed a lot of math teachers requesting cooking supplies. And at first we thought we got it wrong. And then we dug around a little bit and we thought maybe there was like some fraud happening on the site, like what do they need this for? And then what we realized was that a bunch of these really cutting-edge, innovative teachers in high-need classrooms had figured out that using recipes was a great way to teach fractions to reluctant math learners. So they would say, here's the recipe. Now we've got to make it for 4 times as many people. And anyway, this is an example but we just found this through happenstance, and we said to ourselves, wow, if we just stumbled upon this is actually happening all throughout our site, but the scale is such that we don't notice, and we'd like to dig in there. The last thing I'll mention is that we got to this point. We're super excited about the idea of hiring a data scientist, but this is not a typical position at a nonprofit, at a charity. So it's not like something that's already carved out in the budget. So we had to go kind of hunting for special funds to bring the position to life, and we're fortunate that some folks who have done very well with data, our board member Jeff Weiner, and also Reid Hoffman, those guys at LinkedIn, and also a friend of ours, Tony Meyer, here in New York, were really excited about the potential of data and the impact it could have on our business and education. So they actually got behind it and helped us fund this position that otherwise we frankly wouldn't have had the money for.
Great, and I'm just trying to think, my recalling is that contest, actually, Max was one of the winners of that original search. Is that actually how you knew him? Yeah. Oh, and Mike as well. Oh. So is that how you originally met Max?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Wow, great. And so once you knew that you wanted this, once you had seen some examples and seen that there were things you thought were really promising, how did you start the search for someone?
So we knew generally what we wanted, kind of the outputs, at least, as it were, the things I just rattled off. But we had no idea how to hire for this position. We didn't know whether that job description was even right. We didn't know whether it actually mapped to a data scientist. We were just like, these are the things we want. And we had no idea what the desired background or profile was, or where to look, or how to interview. So arguably, the only thing we had going for us is that we knew we didn't know all this stuff. And so we said, OK, we definitely need some help. And I don't think the help is like in the building. And exactly, we had met Max through the Hacking Education Contest because he and Mike built this amazing submission that ended up winning a big prize. And we met in order to say what they built was so compelling that we actually got the teams together to say, how do we fold this into DonorsChoose.org because it's so cool. And in that interaction, we got to know Max, and we're like, hey, Max is great. And so when we realized we needed help, we were like, let's ask Max, and we asked Max for help.
It's true.
Great. Okay. So now we know how you got to want Max involved. So Max, what made you interested in helping DonorsChoose with this?
Well, I've been a big supporter of the org for a long time, both in the Hacking Education Contest and also just as a donor. I think it's great stuff. And I had just come out of working at OkCupid, and I was starting up my consultancy, and I wanted to do something that I knew was kind of giving back, and it was going to be good for both the data science community of putting a data scientist in a really successful organization, and also help an org out that I liked a lot. So it was basically right after I had left OkCupid, and I came in for a meeting and sat down, and immediately Oliver and the CTO, Charles, just rattled off like 25 projects. They're like, we're so excited to be working on this sort of stuff. Like, help us find someone. And the process basically was they gave me a basic written description of what they wanted. And I took a look at it, and I said, I think what you're looking for is slightly different than what you've written down. So for example, one of the things that they originally had in the job description was for people who had SQL skills. And I am definitely of the opinion that you grow a data scientist at this point, rather than necessarily being able to hire someone who has all the skills out of the box. It's not quite like fields that are more established, like software development, where you kind of know, OK, this person has a degree in computer science, and they have 2 years experience at a major organization. They should know these things. I think instead, you need to find clever people who are interested in teaching themselves things, who are willing to put in the effort to learn the right stuff. And so I kind of re-engineered the job description to be more about skills in producing results, quantitative ability to explain. I mean, that ended up being one of the bigger criteria that we used in selecting is, can somebody think quantitatively? Can they teach themselves? And if they know something, can they actually explain it to us? And can they explain it in a way that makes sense, even if we don't know the underlying material? And that ended up working out pretty well.
So basically, the job description ended up being sort of clear quantitative thinking and the capacity to express it to other people, you say?
Yep. And of course, some amount of programming knowledge, just because we didn't really have time to have somebody first start learning how to program, and some amount of stats knowledge, because we wanted to make sure that somebody could operate independently in the organization. But it was really, I think, it was clear thinking and good quantitative skills, and evidence of good quantitative skills, right? I think it was Adam Lycano who said earlier about when was asked what people should do if they want to come into data science, and he said they should do things, they should make projects, they should finish things, and that was also just a clear, I guess I don't want to say green flag, but whatever this like to go ahead, like evidence of work, a body of work, and that was it was important to us.
And let me also tack on that some of the things that we wanted to make sure were in the mix for the right candidate, or things that, maybe I'll say it another way, that we were nervous about not finding. One was working on short project cycles. And those of you who work in a web business, like it's a charity, but we run it like a web business. And we imagined that some projects would take 2 days, and some might take a week, and maybe a really big one would take a month. But this wasn't going to be a traditional research cycle where it's like, well, after the first semester, I'm going to have this output, and then by year 2, my hope is we're just like, no, we can't. Our needs, are such that we need, and so we needed someone who, I guess maybe to some degree, hadn't spent their career working on a different cycle, because that would have made us nervous about, even if they say they can do short cycle, will they really be happy doing something short cycle? And then the other thing, which Max alluded to, is just like, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it's like some amount of hacker chops, so that the person in the role could be self-sufficient. So our team is small, and unlike Microsoft or Google, we can't have a team of people whose job it is to like move the data from system A to system B to system C, and then scrub it and clean it, and then load it up into this other system, which the researchers love, and only then, everything's there for you. You can go nuts, and we don't have any of that. So we needed someone who would be able to sort of bootstrap on their own technically. Yeah,
I mean, I know, I'm sure you have tons of questions to follow up, but I just want to tackle on that one more thing, which is, I think there's been a lot of discussion today about what data science is, and I think there's a lot of totally valid different perspectives on data science. But the one that I worked with in helping to write this position was you needed somebody who could understand at a business level what the problem was, and figure out how to translate that business level question into a program of actually doing the acquisition. So a lot of people have started their definition of data science with acquisition. I think there's a step before that, which is kind of business to acquisition. How do you know what to get? Then getting it, then visualizing it, doing basic exploratory analysis, doing the modeling, being able to tell how good you've done and report the results. And I think that kind of framework was what I was trying to build the job description around.
Great. Well, so sort of following up on the topic of acquisition, because the ultimate result of this is the acquisition actually of Jay here, who is the data scientist now working at DonorsChoose. So we've sort of described how you came to realize you had a need for a data scientist. We've talked now about sort of what Max's vision of what you should be hiring was. How did you actually publicize the opening once you decided that this is the position we want to fill? How did you try to get it out to people and say, here, please apply for this job. We hope that people with these qualifications will be here.
I emailed everyone, and you posted a lot of places, right?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so we did, just to get really specific, we did Stack Overflow, 37 signals, flowing data, which I'd never before published a job posting to.
Nathan has it.
Idealist, which is focused on NGOs and nonprofits, which is a site that we often post job descriptions to. We also had this mailing list of about 400 developers and data crunchers from the contest last summer. So we blasted that list, did all the tweeting and the Facebooking and the LinkedIning.
So, Jay, how did you actually find the position?
Yeah, so I just graduated college, and I was looking for a data science job. And I was reaching out to my friends and to my networks, and I think I ended up seeing it on Stack Overflow.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so it was just sort of DonorsChoose is looking for a data scientist. You saw it and you thought, well, this looks appealing. I think I'll apply.
Yeah, it really struck me because it seemed like, I guess just surveying the different positions out there that, for a data scientist, there are a lot involving, the ad industry, a lot involving other startups doing interesting, work in the biotech field maybe. And this one really struck me because it was kind of not like the others. And at the same time, they're asking really ambitious questions. Like, can we change how schools get funded in the country based on our data, or can we understand how teachers are innovating? And I think the org as a nonprofit was very convincing to me as an org that was really sort of they were actually they were legitimately interested in these questions because at the heart of the organization is a social mission to improve schools in the country, and I thought that was a very persuasive job description. Yeah.
Well, certainly, I would love the job. So it sounds actually great. So this sort of gets a sense of how you decide that you would like to work with DonorsChoose. So presumably you sent in an application. Max and Oliver, when you were looking through people, how did Jay stand out to you? What made you think, well, this is someone we'd really like to interview and talk to?
I did I basically volunteered to do the first resume pass. And I was looking especially for, as I said, people who looked like they had good quantitative skills, who had, who I got some sense would be able to bootstrap. I actually originally was focusing more on people who had been out of college for a bit longer. And Jay's resume just struck me as he'd done a lot of really interesting internships and just had a lot of things that he'd already accomplished. And the fact that I think it's totally possible to get out of a top university with great grades and have never actually finished your own project, to have just sort of filled in the blanks on final projects and things, and seeing, some of your other stuff, that was good.
And so the sort of jump forward in the process that after sort of some screening, and I guess we can run through the process in a moment, sort of the structure in case that might be useful for anyone. But after Max brought Jay's submission to my attention, the things from our side, the things that were exciting were that he showed a real interest in understanding in our org and the social impact part. You probably take that for granted, like, well, why would you go work at a charity or a nonprofit if you weren't passionate about the mission? But you wouldn't believe how many job applications, how much inbound stuff I get where the person's like, I like Java. And you're like, we're trying to change education here. We're opening classrooms here. And they're like, no, the thing is. And so anyway, that was the fact that Jay was actually interested in the mission was meaningful. And as he mentioned, the bigger picture stuff, like trying to impact economic or educational policy, the fact that he had this hands-on, hacker chops and some bunch of CS coursework under his belt, and also not to embarrass.
Stuff as well.
What's that?
The Santa Fe stuff as well was, yeah.
Exactly,
yeah,
and then maybe lastly, and I don't want to embarrass Jay talking about what he did in high school, but I think Jay was on the debate or forensics, and so that was sort of just, when you're scanning a resume, one of the things we wanted was to make sure that this data scientist could communicate with non-data scientists. So I saw, well, he obviously is focused a bit on communication, and that bodes well.
Great. So you mentioned Java as something that you're sort of like, well, we'll pass on this. Sort of, what are the other people who had applied, and sort of, what would the typical applicant look like?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't know, I may have seen more resumes than you did. I screened out a lot of them, and there was a lot of different stuff.
You saw a lot more than I did.
Yeah, there was some, that taxonomy from one of the first lectures I thought actually would have been really relevant to have had back then. I saw a lot of people who had sort of Excel-sized business analysis skills.
Mm-hmm.
We saw a bunch of people who were machine learning types, some engineering people who had data engineering experience. And I think that we, just looking at people's background, and I did a handful of in-depth Skype interviews with people as the resumes were coming in, and I started to notice that the people who were doing better were the ones who had a more quantitative background as opposed to a more engineering background specifically. Like the ones who had done math courses or pure CS courses seemed to just be better at stumbling their way through things they didn't understand, as opposed to saying, I don't know how to do that, I'm sorry. And that I thought tended to lead me towards people with more of a classical quantitative background.
Interesting. So that sounds like one lesson you learned from the interviewing process, sort of a preference for people with sort of stricter quantitative backgrounds. So were there other sort of strong lessons that you think you took from interviewing and looking through people that you're like, these are the sorts of things we think are sort of touchstones that we want to get on?
I think definitely explaining, being able to, like anybody who had done a PhD, I should be able to ask you, what did you study in your PhD? What was your thesis about? And get an answer that I can understand even as a non-expert in the field. And we had a bunch of people who passed that test with flying colors, but there was a surprisingly large number who couldn't really articulate without what they had done.
Yeah, this is common for PhDs.
Yeah, I mean, but I think if you're anytime you've got this big chunk of time in your life, even if it's a prior job or a PhD or whatever it is, being able to explain what you did, why you made the choices that you made, how it fit into a bigger context. I mean, that explanatory ability I found was just really correlated with someone's ability to answer questions. I did an actual interactive programming assignment on
like pair
Skype.
Programming.
Yeah, I mean, I asked a couple of basic questions about data transformation and how to handle medium-sized data sets. And I think the people who were good at explaining often also were pretty good at quantitative things, often also were able to just stumble their way through that stuff, which is interesting.
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting to think of the sort of cluster of skills that you were sort of selecting for.
So I can also I thought it might be useful to paint a picture of, of course without naming names and scrubbing away personally identifiable information. I was going to paint a picture of two of the finalists for the gig and their profiles, just to give you a sense of where we're headed, but then some of the things that maybe weren't perfect. So one of the candidates we found via Stack Overflow. She had just completed her master's at a top school, undergrad at top school, super strong math and CS background, like off the charts intellectual horsepower, like one of those people that like 3 minutes into the meeting, you're like, yeah, they're a lot smarter than me. Like, but not because they're trying to sound smarter than you, because it's pretty clear that they're smarter than you. And she had a genuine interest in the org, and she had offers from big companies that are impressive that you guys would recognize. And after we did all the way through the full interview loop, we ended up deciding it wasn't a perfect match. And the two reasons were that, one, to what Max alluded to, was there was a little bit of like an impedance mismatch in terms of just like when you talk to civilians, which you will have to do in this role, can you communicate with civilians about these important topics? And maybe this is probably going to go away in 12 months, but coming right out of perhaps the academic environment, I don't know what it was, but that was hard. And then also, to her credit, she was saying, hey, I'm a little nervous about being a data science team of one. Like, I'm new to my career, so can I be sitting next to other data scientists and learn the trade? And we were saying, well, that's a very legitimate thing to want, but it's not something we can necessarily provide in spades because we don't have a team of 10. And then another candidate who was a really strong finalist found us via a tweet. So it turns out people are actually reading these tweets, and had undergraduate and master's CS degrees, a bunch of time at IBM, super strong candidate. But in the end, it turned out the candidate was preferred to work remotely, and which we considered. But then we said, you know what? This role is going to be so important to us, and it's so critical that the person be sitting with and next to the subject matter experts and next to the tech team, that we said, you know, it has to be someone on site.
Interesting. So that's sort of people that you turned down. So Jay, obviously you're on your side, or sort of without naming names again, are there sort of types of offers that you turned down? And you mentioned ad tech and things like that. Was that sort of mostly what you were looking at, or what other things were you like?
Yeah, so there are other ed tech startups that I was looking at, but I think, as well as other startups in general. But the thing that really got me excited about this role was there's an opportunity to do more exploratory work and not just technical work, and I found that appealing. Yeah.
Great. So speaking about sort of the work, I mean, what was the first thing you did once you started at DonorsChoose?
Sure, yeah, I showed up, and like in the first week or two, the first assignment was, there's this large foundation, the Wasserman Foundation, which is based in LA, that partnered with DonorsChoose to give $4 million to LAUSD, which is the second largest school district after New York. And the way they did it was they gave out gift cards to the residents of LA, and the people of LA got to choose how the money was spent out. And so the analysis was for the Wasserman Foundation to sort of answer the big questions of, you know, how are we engaging citizens in philanthropy, the citizens of LA? What are their education priorities? And the other big question was, and the other big goal of the campaign was to sort of like energize the micro-philanthropy community in LA, to encourage teachers to post on the site, to join the site. And so I did some analysis involving, you know, did some heat plots, a look at what the growth was like during that time period. But yeah, it turned out well, and it was really good forcing function in my first week or two to like really learn the schema, learn SQL in like 2 days, and put all that together. Yeah.
Sounds like that supports Max's concern that you don't really need that much SQL coming in.
Sure. Actually, I just want to make this point that because we were nervous. I don't want to rewind all the way, but we were nervous about not saying that someone had to know SQL in the job description, because I was like, Max, they cannot. I mean, we basically, if you took away our logo and our mission statement, we would look technically internally like an e-commerce company, because we're doing the transactions and matching in the marketplace, and so we were definitely, we're like, you cannot answer any question about anything that's happened on our website, with a couple of exceptions, without reaching into this database. And Max was just like, don't worry, guys, the right person is going to be able to learn what they need to learn really quickly. And it turned out Jay learned it really quickly. So Max was right, and actually Jay did the learning, and much frankly harder than SQL is our schema, which is like complicated and has all these legacy annoyances, but you know, Jay just dug in.
Awesome. So I guess can you comment a little bit more about that? So sort of, what other things have you done since then? Sort of, what else have you learned in your experience now? How long have you actually been at DonorsChoose?
So I've been there for 2 months now. I started in July.
So yeah, it's pretty brief. Yeah,
this is real time.
Yeah, we can see this is clearly.
Yeah, I'm working right now.
Just-in-time discussion. So, sort of, what have you learned in those 2 months? And then also to both Max and Oliver, sort of, what are you doing to help Jay learn more about sort of both DonorsChoose and about sort of being a data scientist?
Yeah, the biggest steps for me were definitely going from sort of the theoretical knowledge of like, you know, statistical theory and machine learning to applying that to answer real questions, to, you know, things like learning a schema were things that I was not exposed to. But after I'd gotten through that, the first things I did were try and explore the data, doing things like regression analysis to understand what factors matter in a project success. I did some work with LDA doing topic modeling on the project text, because we figured, you know, these projects are, you know, the crystallizations of teachers' many years of experience, them trying to innovate, and we felt there was a lot that could be in the corpus. And so I did some topic modeling to get a hold of what is on the site, because it's really hard for us to know, given, you know, the sheer volume of projects that go through the site. And so I did a lot of things early on to sort of explore the data and get my hands dirty and sort of answer simple questions for myself, like, you know, what's the tipping point on a project? Like, at what point, once you funded, what percentage do you have to fund a project to, you know, ensure that you have a 95% chance of success? Just simple numbers for like me to get a feel for how does this marketplace work, and you know, what's going on here essentially, to get my head straight. Yeah.
So do you have sort of one cool tidbit that you've learned in your 2 months that you're like, this is the most interesting thing I've done while exploring this data?
Sure, yeah. I thought, I did LDA on just the arts projects, and one thing that I thought was really interesting was one topic that showed up was for ORF instruments, and I saw that and I was like, that can't be right. That's not a real word. And it turned out, I look on the site and there's many projects for ORF instruments as there are for guitars. And you look, and it turns out ORF instruments are instruments that are particularly easy for kids to learn, made by Carl Orff, and there's like a philosophy of education around that. And I thought that was just like a really cool fact because, not just in itself, but it shows that there are a lot of things that teachers know that we don't. And there are a lot of ways that they're innovating that we can't see necessarily or know, prior to looking at the data.
Great. And so speaking of teaching, sort of what are you guys doing to sort of help teach Jay and keep going?
Yeah,
or you've led him onto his own devices.
In the basement with some bread and
the red stapler. So we're definitely leveraging our network to get Jay in front of other data scientists so we can get advice and hear best practices and hear how their org does it and what's their tech stack. And so there are a bunch of people in the room who've already had coffee with Jay at our request and shared best practices. So thank you. And there are probably other people in the room who will still call on. And the other is that we've been, and this gets at sort of the topic of the areas of the job in terms of helping us run our business better. We've been routing the requests, sort of very directed data requests to Jay as well. Mm-hmm. And he would probably describe this as, to some degree, the least sexy part of the job. But I think it has forced him to really get into the schema and understand the business rules, which are frankly harder to wrap your head around at most businesses than the foreign. It's not the foreign key constraints that are complicated. It's like, I don't even understand how this data got here. What is the business rule that is making all this data pour in here the way it is? So I hope to some degree that's been helpful.
And then I've also, DonorsChoose has retained me as well to help provide mentorship going forward for a bit, just to bring a bit of outside knowledge and the kind of the data scientist next door.
Yeah, this has been I think really, I don't want to. We can ask Jay how it's worked out for him, but for us it's been great. Not just because we get to keep working with Max, but it was actually a conversation. Jay's probably hearing this for the first time, but it's a conversation that we had even before Jay came on board, which is we said, well, Max, look, in every way, we're super excited about Jay, but like literally, we literally pushed Jay's start date back so he could graduate from undergrad. So we were like, okay, like he has a bunch of great projects under his belt, but we want him to learn how to be a data scientist get mentorship. And so anyway, it worked out great. That Max was like, well, I can help with that. And we were like, then we need your help with that. So that's what we're doing, and it's ongoing.
Great. So I guess sort of one last thing before, as we're starting to run out of time, is sort of to all three of you, sort of what are the biggest lessons? What are the things that sort of Max is now continuing to contribute? What are you learning, Jay? Sort of what is it that you would offer to the rest of the room and people who are trying to now start to hire data scientists? Sort of what is your pithy utterance that you would give about that topic?
You go first. You're going to be pithy.
Sure. On the topic of hiring data scientists, I guess I'll just reiterate, I think that data scientists at this point in the life cycle of the field, insofar as it's a field, data scientists are really grown rather than acquired. At this point, you really need to give people the opportunity to not be good at everything before they show up, and give them challenges and enough rope to be able to build their own bridges and things. And I absolutely agree. Making sure that your data people get their hands dirty, and even if they come in with a really hardcore stats background, that they either already know how to or are willing to immediately start getting their own data and working with it and not having to rely on someone else, I think is crucial.
Great. Jay?
Sure. I guess I can't give too much advice on hiring, but I can talk a little bit about maybe what you can do to prepare for a gig like this. I think while you're in school, what you can certainly do is get your head around the statistical theory, as that's a great place to learn it, and it's I think much harder to pick that up once you're out of school maybe. But I think one thing that you really don't get while you're in school that's useful for the job is learning how to pose a question or learning how to once you have the data, once you have the tools, you know the algorithms, you know the runtimes and the complexity and all that, but how do you know what is a useful question, or how to, given a vague question, refine it and really attack it? Yeah. I think that's like one skill that I've really been working to develop.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, my tidbit, which you've heard a couple times, is basically just like, if you get the feeling that you don't know anything about this topic, like get help, which is what we did, and there's just no way it would have worked out as well as it has without Max's help. And what I'm used to doing is hiring software engineers, and it's like, you wouldn't imagine someone who's not a software engineer trying to hire one. I mean, it happens every day, but I would argue that it probably happens with a lower degree of success than when someone who is a software engineer, who has hired software engineers, does the hunting and does the interviewing, and that, and also just getting crisp about what exactly you need. Right? Data science is like hot, 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 but really it means different things to different people. Different orgs have different needs. So that's the other part, was sort of Max helping us get crisp about, okay, you guys are excited, you have all these things you want to aim data science at, but like, what are we really talking about? And then you know what you're looking for.
Yep. And I think also that gets to the point about creativity as well, about the kind of things you would pick up on an interview. And I think if you know a lot about software engineering and you're interviewing a software engineer, you can tell the difference between someone who knows sort of the textbook answers and somebody who actually can creatively solve a problem that's before them for the first time. And I think that however you do it, finding some way to assess the creative problem solving and the lateral thinking of candidates is really useful. I mean, as Jay is talking about, and as I was mentioning also before, the step of going from business need to what do I actually want out of my data. Yeah. And I think that my gut is that what correlates best with that is kind of lateral thinking or creativity. And that's, I think, you want to just, however you pull people out, make sure that you at least have a good feeling about that, even if you aren't 100% sure.
Great. I mean, I think that's a perfect closing point, sort of that's the skill set you need to have. Sadly, we're sort of out of time now. I think if you're interested in getting help, which is the topic we've been touching about, I think chat with Oliver, Jay, or Max afterwards and sort of discuss, what are your issues if you're trying to hire a data scientist, and hopefully they can give you some advice. Yep. I think that we'll close on that. Yep. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you for participating.